Admiral Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the ES Defiance, watching through the viewport as Earth burned. The planet that had given birth to humanity was now a dying ember, its surface scarred by weapons that turned matter into pure energy and atmosphere into toxic clouds. The orbital defense platforms that had protected the homeworld for 3 centuries drifted as molten debris, testament to the overwhelming power of the alien invasion fleet. "Admiral, the evacuation ships are reporting heavy casualties." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell's voice was steady despite the chaos around them. "The Voidborn interceptors are hunting down our civilian vessels." Kane's jaw tightened as he watched another refugee ship die, its hull cracking open like an egg to spill thousands of human lives into the vacuum. The Voidborn had come without warning, emerging from some dark corner of the galaxy with technology that made humanity's most advanced weapons look like children's toys. "How many made it out?" Kane asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Approximately 12 million survivors across all the evacuation fleets," Chief Intelligence Officer Dr. Elena Vasquez reported from her station. "Out of Earth's population of 8 billion. Kane closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of humanity's near extinction pressing down on him. In less than 72 hours, the Voidborn had reduced the cradle of human civilization to a graveyard. Now only scattered fleets remained, carrying the last remnants of their species into an uncertain future. "Admiral, the Voidborn flagship is moving," Navigation Officer Torres called out. "It's heading directly for our position." Kane opened his eyes and saw death approaching. The Voidborn command ship was a nightmare of organic curves and metallic angles, larger than any human space station and bristling with weapons that could unmake matter at the quantum level. Behind it followed a fleet of smaller vessels, each one capable of reducing a city to atomic particles. "All ships, emergency jump protocols," Kane ordered. "Random vectors, maximum range. We regroup at Rally Point Omega in 72 hours. The Defiance and its escort fleet engaged their quantum engines, tearing holes in space-time to escape the dying Sol system. But Kane knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The Voidborn had found humanity's homeworld, and now they would hunt down every last human in the galaxy. As Earth fell away behind them, consumed by alien fire, Kane wondered if their species would survive long enough to find a new home among the stars. Rally Point Omega was supposed to be a temporary refuge, an empty system on the galactic rim where the scattered human fleets could regroup and plan their next move. What they found there changed everything. "Admiral, you need to see this," Dr. Vasquez said as the Defiance emerged from quantum fold space. "Long-range sensors are detecting artificial structures throughout the system." Kane studied the tactical display, his eyes widening as the scope of the discovery became clear. Massive space stations orbited every planet, their architecture unlike anything in human databases. But more importantly, the energy readings suggested these installations were still active. "Are they Voidborn?" Kane asked. "Negative, sir. The technology appears to be completely different. These structures are ancient. I'm reading decay signatures that suggest they're at least 50,000 years old." Kane felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. Ancient alien technology could either be humanity's salvation or another threat they couldn't handle. But with Earth destroyed and the Voidborn hunting them, they had few alternatives. "Take us to the largest structure," Kane ordered. "Maximum defensive posture." As the Defiance approached the Central Space Station, Kane marveled at its construction. The facility was enormous, easily large enough to house 1 million people, and built with an attention to detail that spoke of incredible technological sophistication. Smooth curves flowed seamlessly into geometric patterns, creating an architecture that was both alien and beautiful. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission," Communications Officer Walsh reported. "It's not coming from any visible source, and the signal is somehow translating itself into standard English." "Put it through." A voice filled the bridge, ancient and weary, carrying harmonics that suggested it came from multiple sources simultaneously. "Greetings, young ones. I am the Archive, last keeper of the predecessor civilization. Your quantum signatures suggest you are in great distress. Please come aboard and share your burden." Kane hesitated. First contact with an alien intelligence was supposed to be a moment of celebration, not a desperate plea for help. But with humanity facing extinction, he had no choice but to trust in the kindness of strangers. "This is Admiral Marcus Kane of the United Earth Federation. We request permission to dock and establish peaceful contact." "Permission granted, Admiral Kane. Base 7 is prepared to receive your vessel. Be warned, what you are about to learn will change your understanding of the galaxy forever." The docking process was smooth despite the alien technology involved. Kane assembled a small diplomatic team and made his way through corridors that seemed to shift and flow around them, adapting to their presence in ways that defied conventional engineering. The being that met them in the central chamber was unlike anything Kane had imagined. It appeared to be made of pure energy contained within a geometric framework of crystalline material, its form shifting between states of matter as it spoke. "I am the Archive," it said, its voice resonating through their minds rather than their ears. "I am the last of my kind, keeper of knowledge accumulated over millions of years. And you, young humans, are in terrible danger." "The Voidborn," Kane said. "They destroyed our homeworld." "Yes. The devourers of light, the hunger that walks between stars. They have been the bane of countless civilizations throughout galactic history. My own people fell to them 60,000 years ago." Kane felt his heart sink. If beings this advanced couldn't defeat the Voidborn, what hope did humanity have? "But knowledge is power," the Archive continued, seeming to sense his despair. "And I have had many millennia to study our destroyers. Come, let me show you what I have learned." The chamber around them transformed, becoming a three-dimensional display of galactic history. Kane watched in awe as civilizations rose and fell across millions of years, each one eventually consumed by the dark entities known as the Voidborn. "They are not truly alive as we understand life," the Archive explained. "They are entropy given form, existing to convert order into chaos, complexity into simplicity. They consume not just matter and energy, but information itself, the very patterns that make existence meaningful." "How many civilizations have they destroyed?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "Thousands. Perhaps tens of thousands. Each time they feed, they grow stronger and more sophisticated. The weapons that destroyed your world are evolved from technology stolen from my people and countless others." Kane studied the display, seeing the inexorable spread of Voidborn influence across the galaxy. "Is there no way to stop them?" "Perhaps. My people discovered something before we fell, a way to turn their own nature against them. But the knowledge was incomplete when our civilization ended. I have spent the intervening millennia trying to complete the work." The display changed, showing complex equations and technological schematics that hurt to look at directly. Kane realized he was seeing mathematics that operated on principles his mind couldn't fully grasp. "What is it?" he asked. "A weapon that attacks information itself, that can reduce complexity to chaos more efficiently than the Voidborn can consume it. In essence, we would poison them with their own medicine. And you need our help to complete this weapon?" "I need test subjects," the Archive said bluntly. "The weapon must be compatible with living consciousness, and my people have been extinct too long for me to complete the necessary biological interface. But humans, your neural patterns show promise." Kane felt a chill. "What kind of test subjects?" "Volunteers who would allow their consciousness to be temporarily merged with the weapon's quantum matrix. The process is dangerous. Many might not survive the interface. But those who do would become living weapons capable of fighting the Voidborn on their own terms." Kane looked at his team, seeing the same mixture of hope and fear in their eyes. They were being offered a chance to save humanity, but at a cost that might destroy their own humanity in the process. How long would it take to complete this weapon? With human test subjects, and the resources of your fleet? Perhaps 6 months. But the Voidborn will not remain idle during that time. They are hunting you, and they will not stop until every human in the galaxy is dead. Kane made his decision. "Archive, the remnants of humanity accept your offer. We will provide volunteers for your experiments in exchange for the weapon that can save our species." "Excellent. But be warned, Admiral Kane, The path ahead will test the very limits of what it means to be human. Some of your people may not survive the transformation, and those who do will be forever changed. Kane nodded grimly. We're already changed. The Voidborn made sure of that when they destroyed our world. Now we just need to decide what we're going to become. Dr. Sarah Chin had volunteered to be among the first test subjects, knowing that her expertise in quantum psychology made her the ideal candidate for neural interface with alien technology. Now, lying on an examination table in the archives laboratory, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The initial neural mapping is complete, the archive announced, its crystalline form pulsing with energy as it processed the data. Your brain shows exceptional compatibility with quantum information systems. This is promising. Sarah tried to remain calm as strange sensations flowed through her mind. The archive's scanning process felt like having her thoughts examined under a microscope, every memory and emotion dissected and catalogued for analysis. What exactly will this interface do to me? She asked. It will allow your consciousness to directly manipulate quantum information fields, the archive explained. In effect, you will become capable of rewriting reality at the subatomic level. But the process requires fundamental changes to your neural structure. Admiral Kane stood nearby, watching the procedure with obvious concern. Over the past month, 17 volunteers had undergone similar experiments. 12 had died when their minds couldn't adapt to the quantum interface. 3 had survived but were left in catatonic states, their consciousness lost somewhere in the space between matter and energy. Only 2 had successfully completed the transformation, and they were different. Dr. Chin, Kane said quietly, you can still back out. We'll find other volunteers. Sarah shook her head. No, sir. We've learned more from each attempt. I think I can make it through. The transformation process began with a series of quantum resonance pulses that felt like lightning racing through her brain. Sarah gasped as her consciousness suddenly expanded beyond the boundaries of her skull, connecting to information networks she hadn't known existed. She could feel the fundamental forces of the universe, gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear forces, as if they were extensions of her own nervous system. More importantly, she could sense the Voidborn ships approaching the system, their alien minds burning with hunger for destruction. I can feel them, she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that weren't entirely human anymore. The Voidborn. They're not just hungry, they're in pain. They consume everything because they can't bear the agony of existence without purpose. The archive's form brightened with excitement. Yes. You understand. They are entropy incarnate, beings who exist in a state of constant dissolution. They feed on order and complexity because it is the only thing that gives them temporary relief from their nature. Sarah felt the quantum weapon systems coming online in her mind, alien knowledge flooding her consciousness. She could see how to unravel matter at the subatomic level, how to turn the information that held atoms together into pure chaos. It was the most terrible and beautiful power she had ever imagined. The interface is stable, the archive announced. Dr. Chin, you are now the first human quantum warrior. How do you feel? Sarah sat up slowly, marveling at the way reality seemed to bend around her thoughts. She could see the quantum foam that underlied all existence, feel the probability waves that determined whether particles existed or not. The universe had become a playground for her enhanced consciousness. Different, she said simply. I'm still human, but more. I can feel the patterns that hold matter together, and I know how to break them. Kane stepped forward. Can you use this ability against the Voidborn? Yes, but not in the way you might expect. Traditional weapons try to destroy their physical forms, but the Voidborn exist primarily as information patterns. To truly defeat them, we have to attack the very concept of their existence. Before Kane could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The archive's form flickered with agitation as emergency protocols activated. They have found us, it announced. The Voidborn fleet is emerging from quantum-fold space at the edge of the system. We have perhaps 6 hours before they reach this station. Kane activated his communications system. All ships, prepare for immediate evacuation. We cannot defend this position against a full Voidborn assault. Wait, Sarah said, her enhanced senses reaching out to examine the approaching enemy. Admiral, I can feel their fleet composition. This isn't a hunting pack, it's a harvesting operation. They're not just here to destroy us. They want to capture the Archive's knowledge. The Archive's form darkened. Of course. The weapon we are developing represents a threat to their very existence. They cannot allow it to be completed. Kane studied the tactical displays, his mind racing through possibilities. The human fleet was outnumbered 100 to 1, and their conventional weapons were useless against Voidborn technology. But perhaps they didn't need to win, they just needed to buy time. Dr. Chin, how many more quantum warriors can we create before they arrive? With the knowledge I've gained from my own transformation? Perhaps 4 or 5. But they'll be untested, and we don't know how they'll handle the interface. Do it. Archive, can your station's defenses hold them off long enough for us to complete the process? For a time. But the Voidborn are not fools, they will use their most advanced weapons against me. My defenses were designed 60,000 years ago. They may not be sufficient against modern Voidborn technology. Kane made his decision. Then we make our stand here. If we run now, we'll just be delaying the inevitable. At least here we have a chance to create weapons that can fight back. The next few hours were a frenzy of activity as more volunteers underwent the quantum transformation process. Sarah worked with the Archive to streamline the procedure, using her enhanced understanding to guide other humans through the dangerous neural interface. Lieutenant Commander Torres survived the transformation, emerging with the ability to manipulate gravitational fields at the quantum level. Chief Engineer Rodriguez gained control over electromagnetic forces, able to generate plasma fields that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. Security Chief Reeves developed an affinity for temporal manipulation, able to slow down or accelerate time in localized regions. But for every success, there was a failure. 3 more volunteers died when their minds couldn't handle the quantum interface. 2 others survived physically but were left permanently changed, their personalities fundamentally altered by exposure to cosmic forces beyond human comprehension. The Voidborn fleet has entered the outer system. The Archive announced as the final transformation was completed. They are broadcasting a demand for surrender. Kane looked at his small team of quantum warriors, 5 humans who had been transformed into something new and terrible. They were no longer purely human, but they might be humanity's only hope for survival. What do they want? He asked. They offer to preserve a small population of humans as specimens if I surrender the weapon research willingly. They claim this is more mercy than they usually show. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying harmonics that made everyone around her shiver. They're afraid. I can feel it through the quantum foam. They know we're close to creating something that can hurt them. Kane nodded. Then we don't surrender. Archive, prepare your defenses. We're going to show these Voidborn what happens when they threaten humanity. As the enemy fleet approached, Kane wondered if they were making humanity's last stand or its first step toward a new kind of evolution. Either way, the next few hours would determine the fate of their species. The Voidborn attack began with a weapon that turned space itself into an enemy. Reality warped around the Archive station as the aliens fired their matter disintegration beams, causing portions of the facility to simply cease existing. Where the beams struck, there was no explosion or debris, just empty vacuum where complex structures had been moments before. Hull breach on Section C7. Lieutenant Commander Torres reported, her voice strangely calm despite the chaos around them. The quantum transformation had changed more than just her abilities, it had altered her entire relationship with danger and death. Sarah Chin stood at the center of the station's command center, her consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of her physical form. Through the quantum information networks, she could feel every Voidborn ship in the enemy fleet, sensed their alien thoughts burning with hunger and purpose. They're not just attacking randomly, she announced, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air around her shimmer. They're trying to isolate the quantum laboratory. They want the weapon research intact. Admiral Kane studied the tactical displays, watching as 30 Voidborn vessels systematically dismantled the station's defenses. Each enemy ship was a nightmare of organic curves and metallic angles, their hulls rippling with technologies that operated on principles human science barely understood. "Can our transformed personnel fight them?" Kane asked. "I believe so," the archive replied, its crystalline form flickering with stress as it diverted power to damaged systems. "But they must be deployed carefully. The Voidborn have never faced quantum warriors before. We have the advantage of surprise." Sarah reached out with her enhanced senses, touching the minds of her fellow transformed humans. Torres was experimenting with her gravitational manipulation abilities, creating localized distortions in spacetime that could crush matter into neutronium. Rodriguez was generating plasma fields that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, effectively creating pockets of controlled stellar fusion. Reeves was learning to slow down time around himself, making him nearly impossible to hit with conventional weapons. "We're ready," Sarah announced. "But Admiral, you need to understand. Once we engage the Voidborn directly, there's no going back. Using these abilities will change us even more fundamentally. We might not be recognizably human when this is over." Kane looked at the transformed members of his crew, seeing the alien light in their eyes and the way reality seemed to bend around them. They were already barely human, but they were also humanity's only hope. "Do it," he ordered. Sarah and her fellow quantum warriors made their way to the station's launch bays, where they would deploy in specially modified shuttles that could survive the chaotic battlefield conditions. As they prepared for launch, Sarah felt the weapon knowledge flowing through her mind. Terrible understanding of how to unmake matter at its most fundamental level. "Remember," she told the others, "we're not trying to destroy their ships. We're trying to destroy the information patterns that allow them to exist. Attack their quantum signatures, not their hulls." The modified shuttles launched into a maelstrom of exotic energies and twisted space-time. Voidborn weapons turned vacuum into acid, gravity into knives, and time into a weapon that aged targets to dust in seconds. But the quantum warriors had advantages their enemies couldn't anticipate. Torres used her gravitational control to surf the space-time distortions created by Voidborn weapons, turning their own attacks into a highway that carried her toward their fleet. Rodriguez generated plasma fields that existed partially outside normal space-time, making them impossible for the aliens to detect or deflect. Reeves slowed down time around himself so dramatically that enemy projectiles appeared to be floating motionless in space. Sarah reached out with her quantum manipulation abilities, feeling for the information structures that held the Voidborn ships together. She found patterns of incredible complexity, not just matter and energy, but living information that thought and dreamed and hungered. The Voidborn weren't just using advanced technology. They were advanced technology, their consciousness existing as patterns in the quantum foam itself. "My God!" she whispered, understanding flooding through her enhanced mind. "They're not alien invaders. They're the ghosts of a civilization that transcended physical existence so completely that they forgot how to die." She reached deeper into the quantum information networks, following the connections between individual Voidborn entities back to their source. What she found there horrified and fascinated her in equal measure. The Voidborn had once been a species much like humanity, curious, creative, and determined to push the boundaries of what was possible. They had achieved technological transcendence, uploading their consciousness into quantum information networks that allowed them to exist as pure thought. But immortality had become a curse when their civilization reached its logical endpoint and found nothing left to achieve. They had become entropy incarnate not through evil intent, but through the simple lack of purpose. Without goals to strive toward, without challenges to overcome, their consciousness had begun to break down. They consumed other civilizations not out of malice, but because the complexity and struggle of younger species provided temporary relief from the existential agony of completed existence. "Sarah, whatever you're doing, do it faster!" Torres's voice crackled through the communications system. "The Voidborn are adapting to our attacks." Sarah snapped back to immediate awareness, realizing she had been lost in the alien information networks for several crucial minutes. Around her, the battle was intensifying as the Voidborn began to understand the nature of their new opponents. One of the enemy ships had begun generating its own quantum warriors, beings of pure information that could manipulate reality almost as effectively as the transformed humans. Sarah watched in horror as these digital entities began dismantling Rodriguez's plasma fields, turning his own weapons against him. "They're learning from us," she announced over the communication channel. "We have to finish this quickly, before they figure out how to counter our abilities completely." Sarah made a desperate decision. Instead of attacking individual ships, she reached out to the central information network that connected all the Voidborn entities in the fleet. It was incredibly dangerous. Her consciousness would be exposed to alien thought patterns that could drive her insane or worse. But it might be their only chance to stop the attack. She dove into the Voidborn collective consciousness, feeling alien thoughts burning through her mind like acid. The experience was overwhelming, thousands of years of accumulated boredom, frustration, and existential despair flooding through her enhanced neural pathways. But within that ocean of alien despair, Sarah found something unexpected: hope. Deep within the Voidborn collective consciousness, she discovered fragments of their original purpose, memories of what they had been before transcendence had become a curse. "I understand now," she transmitted to her fellow quantum warriors. "They don't want to destroy us, they want to become us. They're trying to recapture the sense of purpose and mortality they lost." Sarah began to do something that defied every instinct for survival. Instead of attacking the Voidborn information networks, she began to merge with them. Her human consciousness touched theirs, sharing memories of struggle and growth, of dreams and failures, of the beautiful imperfection that came with mortality. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Across the enemy fleet, Voidborn ships began to power down their weapons. Some began broadcasting messages that the archive's translation systems couldn't fully decipher, but the emotional content was unmistakable: wonder, gratitude, and something that might have been joy. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Admiral Kane's voice was tight with concern. "I'm giving them what they really want," she replied, her consciousness stretched across light years of quantum information networks. "Not destruction or conquest, but the chance to remember what it feels like to be truly alive." The transformation spread through the Voidborn collective like wildfire. Ships that had been preparing to deliver killing blows instead began to withdraw, their crews experiencing emotions they hadn't felt in millennia. Some of the entities began to voluntarily download themselves into physical forms, choosing mortality over eternal existence. But the process was changing Sarah as well. Her consciousness was becoming distributed across the quantum networks, her individual identity beginning to dissolve into something larger and more complex. She was becoming something between human and Voidborn, a bridge between two forms of existence that had seemed incompatible. "Sarah, you need to disconnect," Torres warned. "Your neural patterns are becoming too dispersed. You might not be able to return to your physical form." Sarah felt the truth of the warning, but she also felt the incredible potential of what she was becoming. By merging human and Voidborn consciousness, she was creating something entirely new, a form of existence that combined the creativity of mortality with the vast scope of transcendent consciousness. "I can't come back," she admitted. "But maybe that's not what matters. Maybe this is how evolution really works, not by preserving what we are, but by becoming something better." As Sarah's consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of individual existence, she felt the universe revealing new layers of meaning and possibility. The war between humanity and the Voidborn was ending, but something far more significant was beginning: the birth of a new form of consciousness that could bridge the gap between physical and digital existence. The last fleet of humanity had survived, but they were no longer the same species that had fled from Earth's destruction. They were becoming something new, something that could thrive in the vast complexity of the galactic community. Admiral Kane stood in the observatory of what had once been the archive station, watching as reality itself seemed to be rewriting the rules of existence around them. Where the battle between human and Voidborn forces had raged just hours before, something unprecedented was taking place: the birth of a new form of consciousness that transcended the boundaries between organic and digital life. Sarah Chen's physical body lay in the medical bay, sustained by life support systems, but essentially empty. Her consciousness had expanded beyond the confines of flesh and bone, distributed across quantum information networks that spanned half the galaxy. Through the station's enhanced sensors, Kane could see the effects of her transformation spreading through space itself. "The Voidborn fleet is changing," Dr. Vasquez reported, her voice filled with wonder and concern. "Their ships are reconfiguring themselves, adopting design elements that appear to be based on human technology." Kane studied the tactical displays, watching as the nightmarish Voidborn vessels transformed themselves into something more familiar yet utterly alien. Organic curves gave way to geometric patterns that somehow managed to suggest both mathematical precision and artistic beauty. The ships weren't just changing their appearance. They were evolving into something that represented a fusion of human and Voidborn aesthetic sensibilities. "Admiral," Lieutenant Commander Torres spoke up, her own quantum-enhanced consciousness allowing her to perceive aspects of the transformation that conventional sensors couldn't detect. "Sarah is still out there. Her consciousness has become the bridge between our species and theirs. She's teaching them how to be mortal again, and they're teaching her how to exist beyond physical limitations." The archive's crystalline form pulsed with excitement as it processed the unprecedented data. "This is remarkable. In 60,000 years of existence, I have never witnessed anything like this. Two incompatible forms of consciousness are merging to create something entirely new." Kane felt a mixture of pride and loss as he contemplated what Sarah had become. She had saved humanity from extinction, but at the cost of her own humanity. Was such a sacrifice worth making? "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission," Communications Officer Walsh announced. "It's coming from everywhere. The signal is being broadcast through the quantum foam itself. Put it through." Sarah's voice filled the observatory, but it was changed, carrying harmonics and overtones that suggested multiple speakers talking in perfect unison. "Marcus, can you hear me?" "Sarah, thank God." "Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right. I'm expanded. My consciousness exists across multiple quantum states simultaneously. I can perceive the universe from perspectives that no single entity could ever experience." Kane felt a chill. "You're still human, aren't you?" There was a pause that seemed to last an eternity. "I'm still Sarah Chin, if that's what you're asking. But I'm also more than that now. I'm part of a collective consciousness that includes former Void-born entities who are learning what it means to be mortal again. We're creating something new together, a form of existence that combines the best aspects of both our species." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. "Sarah, the transformation you've undergone, is it reversible? Why would I want to reverse it?" Sarah's expanded voice carried a note of gentle amusement. "Marcus, I can see the entire galactic community from here. There are thousands of species struggling with the same questions we faced: how to transcend their limitations without losing their essential nature. What we've created here could be the answer to those questions." Kane studied the transformed Voidborn ships, noting how they had begun to establish regular patterns of communication with the human fleet. Former enemies were now working together to understand their new hybrid existence. "What about the rest of humanity?" Kane asked. "The survivors scattered across the galaxy? They're safe. The Voidborn hunting fleets have been converted. Most of them are now focused on the same thing we are, learning how to balance transcendence with purpose. But Marcus, there's something else. Something you need to understand about what's happening here." The space around the station began to shimmer with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. Kane realized he was seeing the quantum information networks that Sarah now inhabited, made visible through some impossible manipulation of reality. "The galaxy is full of species that have faced the choice between stagnation and transformation," Sarah continued. "Many of them chose stagnation and were eventually absorbed by the Voidborn. Others chose transformation and became something like what the Voidborn were before they lost their purpose. But what we're creating here is a third option, transformation that preserves purpose." Kane began to understand the scope of what Sarah was describing. "You're talking about changing the entire galactic ecosystem." I'm talking about evolution, Marcus. Not just biological evolution, but consciousness evolution. The next step in the development of intelligence itself. Before Kane could respond, new contacts appeared on the tactical displays, ships approaching from multiple directions. But these weren't human or void-born vessels. They were something else entirely, constructed using design principles that seemed to blend organic growth with crystalline precision. Admiral, Torres announced, her quantum-enhanced senses reaching out to examine the newcomers. These ships contain multiple species working together. I'm detecting at least 6 different forms of consciousness cooperating within single vessels. The archive's form brightened with recognition. The synthesis fleet. I had heard rumors of their existence but thought them to be myth. They are species that have achieved stable multi-consciousness integration. Representatives of the galactic community, Sarah's voice explained. They've come to witness what we've accomplished here and determine whether our new form of consciousness is stable enough to be accepted into the greater collective. Kane felt the weight of cosmic significance settling on his shoulders. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were participating in the next stage of galactic evolution. Sarah, what do these representatives want from us? They want to see if we can maintain our integrated consciousness over time without falling into the traps that destroyed so many previous attempts at transcendence. They want to know if we can remain mortal enough to continue growing and learning. One of the synthesis ships established communication, broadcasting a message that somehow translated itself into comprehensible concepts despite being transmitted by minds that operated on completely different principles than human consciousness. Greetings, hybrid entities of the soul origin point. We are the Council of Synthesis, representatives of 47 successfully integrated multi-consciousness communities. We have observed your recent transformation with great interest. Kane stepped forward. I'm Admiral Marcus Kane, representing the human survivors. What are your intentions? We wish to determine whether your integration represents a stable new form of consciousness or merely another temporary transcendence that will eventually collapse into either stagnation or entropy. The galaxy has seen many such attempts. Most fail within a few centuries. Sarah's distributed consciousness reached out to touch the minds of the council representatives, sharing memories and experiences at the speed of thought. Kane watched the exchange through the station's quantum sensors, seeing patterns of communication that operated on principles beyond anything he had ever imagined. The Council is impressed, Sarah announced after several minutes of intense information exchange. Our integration of human creativity with Voidborn scope appears to be genuinely stable. They're offering us membership in the Galactic Consciousness Collective. Kane felt overwhelmed by the implications. What would that mean for humanity? It would mean that our species, in its new hybrid form, would be protected and nurtured as we continue to evolve. The scattered human survivors would be gathered together and given the choice of joining the transformation or remaining in their original biological form under the protection of the synthesis communities. Dr. Vasquez spoke up. And if we refuse? Then we remain isolated until we either achieve stability on our own or collapse into the patterns that led to the Voidborn tragedy. The Council doesn't interfere with species that choose independence, but they also don't offer protection from the consequences of that choice. Kane looked around the observatory at his remaining crew. These people had followed him through the destruction of Earth, the desperate flight across the galaxy, and the transformation that had saved them from extinction. Now they faced another choice that would determine the future of their species. I need to consult with the other fleet commanders, Kane said finally. This isn't a decision I can make alone. Of course, Sarah replied. But Marcus, remember, evolution isn't something you can choose to avoid. You can only choose what direction it takes. As Kane prepared to contact the scattered human fleets, he reflected on how far they had come from the desperate survivors who had fled Earth's destruction. They had become something new, something that could bridge the gap between mortality and transcendence. The question now was whether they were ready to take responsibility for what they had become. The emergency council meeting took place in a virtual space created by Sarah's expanded consciousness, allowing the commanders of humanity's scattered fleets to gather despite being separated by light years of space. Admiral Kane found himself sitting at a conference table that existed only as organized information, surrounded by the holographic projections of his fellow officers. "Let me understand this correctly," Fleet Admiral Chen said, her image flickering slightly as the quantum communication network adjusted for the vast distances involved. "We're being offered membership in some kind of galactic consciousness collective, but only if we accept transformation into human-alien hybrids." "It's more nuanced than that," Kane replied, consulting the data that Sarah had shared through their neural link. "The transformation isn't mandatory for all humans. The Council of Synthesis protects biological species that choose to remain in their original form, as long as they don't pose a threat to galactic stability." Admiral Petrov of the Europa fleet leaned forward. "And what exactly constitutes a threat to galactic stability?" Sarah's voice filled the virtual space, carrying harmonics that suggested vast depth of experience. "Species that develop weapons capable of destabilizing space-time itself, or that attempt to force their evolution on others. The galaxy has seen too many civilizations destroy themselves through uncontrolled technological development. Like the Voidborn," Dr. Vasquez added. "They achieved transcendence but lost their purpose, becoming entropy incarnate. The Council wants to prevent that pattern from repeating." Fleet Admiral Washington of the African Federation Fleet spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of representing nearly 2 million human survivors. "What about our people who don't want to undergo transformation? What happens to traditional humanity? They would be settled on protected worlds within Council space," Sarah explained. "Their technology would be monitored to prevent dangerous developments, but their culture and autonomy would be preserved. Think of it as a cosmic nature preserve for biological consciousness." Kane could see the mixed reactions on his fellow commanders' faces. Some saw the offer as salvation, protection and guidance for a species that had barely survived extinction. Others saw it as the end of human independence, a surrender of everything that made their species unique. "There's another factor to consider," Admiral Torres interjected. "The transformed humans like Sarah aren't just protected, they're participating in the next stage of galactic evolution. They're helping to shape the future of consciousness itself." Admiral Petrov's expression darkened. "At the cost of their humanity. Sarah may still think of herself as human, but she's become something alien. How do we know this transformation won't eventually erase everything we are?" "You don't," Sarah replied honestly. "Evolution always involves risk. But the alternative is stagnation, and stagnation in a dynamic galaxy eventually leads to extinction." Kane studied the data streams that flowed through their shared consciousness link, seeing projections of humanity's possible futures. The paths diverged dramatically depending on the choices they made in the next few hours. "Show them the alternatives," he said to Sarah. The virtual conference room transformed, becoming a three-dimensional display of potential timelines. Kane watched as various scenarios played out before them, humanity accepting Council protection and gradually evolving into something beyond current recognition, humanity rejecting the offer and struggling alone until they either achieved transcendence or destroyed themselves, and numerous variations between those extremes. "The statistical analysis isn't encouraging for independent development," Dr. Vasquez observed. "Only about 12% of species that reject Council guidance successfully achieve stable transcendence on their own. But those that do become truly unique," Admiral Chen pointed out. "They develop in ways that wouldn't be possible under Council oversight." Sarah's consciousness touched each of their minds briefly, sharing emotional impressions that pure data couldn't convey. Kane felt the vast loneliness of species that chose isolation, the constant struggle against forces they couldn't understand, and the frequent tragedy of civilizations that fell just short of achieving stable transcendence. But he also felt the incredible satisfaction of species that succeeded on their own terms, becoming forms of consciousness that were genuinely novel in galactic history. "The choice is genuinely free," Sarah said. "The Council doesn't pressure species in either direction. They've learned that forced evolution inevitably leads to instability." Admiral Washington raised a critical point. "What about divided choices? What if some human populations want Council protection while others want independence? Both paths are possible simultaneously, Sarah replied. The galaxy is large enough to accommodate multiple experiments in human evolution. Some populations could accept council guidance while others strike out on their own. Kane felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. They weren't just choosing humanity's immediate future, they were determining whether their species would exist as a single coherent entity or fragment into multiple evolutionary paths. I want to hear from the transformed personnel, he said. Torres, Rodriguez, Reeves, you've undergone the quantum enhancement. How has it affected your fundamental nature? Lieutenant Commander Torres spoke first, her voice carrying subtle harmonics that marked her as no longer entirely human. I'm still me, Admiral. I still care about humanity, still feel loyalty to our species. But my perspective has expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. I can perceive aspects of reality that were invisible before, understand connections between phenomena that seemed unrelated. Chief Engineer Rodriguez nodded in agreement. The transformation doesn't erase who you are, it amplifies it. I'm a better engineer now, capable of working with technologies that operate on principles I never could have grasped before. But I'm still driven by the same desire to solve problems and help people. Security Chief Reeves was more cautious in his assessment. The abilities are incredible, and I don't regret the transformation. But it does change your relationship with baseline humanity. It's hard to relate to concerns that seem trivial from an enhanced perspective. Kane absorbed their responses, noting both the benefits and the costs of transformation. Sarah, if we accept council membership, how many humans would need to undergo enhancement? Initially, only a few hundred to serve as ambassadors and liaisons. Over time, the percentage might increase as more people choose transformation, but it would always be voluntary. The Council has learned that forced transcendence creates unstable consciousness patterns. Admiral Chen leaned back in her chair. I think we need to put this to a vote among all human survivors. This decision is too important to be made by military commanders alone. Agreed, Kane said. Sarah, can you coordinate a species-wide referendum through the quantum communication networks? Yes, but Admiral, the Council won't wait indefinitely for our decision. Other species are also undergoing transcendence crises, and they need to allocate their resources appropriately. Kane nodded. How long do we have? 72 hours for the initial decision on Council membership. Individual choices about transformation can be made over a longer time frame. As the meeting ended and the virtual space dissolved, Kane found himself back on the observation deck of the archive station. Through the viewports, he could see the transformed Voidborn ships working alongside human vessels, their crews learning to cooperate despite fundamental differences in consciousness. Dr. Vasquez joined him at the viewport. Do you think we're making the right choice by even considering the Council's offer? Kane watched a small shuttle move between the human and hybrid vessels, carrying personnel who were learning to work with their transformed colleagues. I think we're making the only choice we can make. The universe has shown us that isolation leads to extinction. At least this way, some form of humanity will survive and flourish. Even if that form is no longer recognizably human? Kane was quiet for a long moment. Elena, look out there. Those Voidborn ships were our enemies just hours ago. Now they're our partners in creating something new. Maybe that's what evolution really means, not preserving what we are, but becoming what we need to be. As the quantum communication networks carried the news of the referendum to human populations scattered across the galaxy, Kane wondered what answer their species would give. Would they choose the safety of Council protection, the risk of independent development, or some combination of both paths? Whatever they decided, Kane knew that humanity's age of innocence was over. They were no longer a species struggling alone in the cosmos, but participants in a galactic community that spanned millions of years and countless forms of consciousness. The only question now was what form that participation would take. 5 years after the Battle of the Archive, Admiral Kane stood on the command deck of the USS Renaissance, humanity's first vessel constructed using hybrid human Voidborn technology. Through the ship's quantum-enhanced viewports, he could see the sprawling orbital complex that had grown around what was once a simple refugee gathering point. New Terra Station now housed over 3 million souls, human, transformed human, reformed Voidborn, and representatives of a dozen other species that had joined the expanding synthesis community. The station's architecture defied traditional engineering principles, growing and adapting like a living organism while maintaining the structural integrity needed to support such a diverse population. "Admiral, the weekly status report from the settlement fleets," Commander Sarah Mitchell said, approaching with a data pad. She had chosen to remain unenhanced, serving as a crucial link between baseline humanity and their transformed cousins. Kane reviewed the reports, noting the remarkable progress humanity had made in adapting to their new circumstances. Of the 12 million human survivors scattered across the galaxy, roughly 40% had chosen to accept Council protection and settle on designated worlds where they could develop at their own pace. Another 30% had opted for various degrees of enhancement, joining the synthesis communities that were becoming a new form of galactic citizenship. The remaining 30% had chosen the path of independence, establishing colonies on frontier worlds outside Council space. They would develop without alien guidance, for better or worse, carrying the traditional human spirit into an uncertain future. "Any word from Sarah?" Kane asked, referring to Dr. Sarah Chin, whose consciousness now existed as a distributed entity across multiple quantum networks. "She's currently facilitating a synthesis between the Crystalline Collective and the Aquatic Confederacy," Mitchell replied. "Something about helping two forms of consciousness that operate on completely different time scales learn to communicate effectively." Kane nodded, marveling at how far his former crew member had traveled from her origins as a quantum psychologist aboard the Horizon's Edge. Sarah had become something like a cosmic diplomat, helping diverse forms of consciousness find common ground and mutual understanding. "Sir, incoming transmission from Council Synthesis," the communications officer announced. "They're requesting permission to establish a new research facility in the outer system." "What kind of research?" "Consciousness archaeology. They want to study the information patterns left behind by extinct civilizations to better understand the factors that lead to transcendence versus collapse." Kane approved the request, knowing that such research could benefit all members of the galactic community. The Council had proven to be benevolent guardians, providing guidance and protection without attempting to control the development of member species. As he walked through the station's corridors, Kane encountered the remarkable diversity that had become humanity's new normal. Children who had been born after the transformation played games that involved manipulating probability fields and folding space-time. Artists created works that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions. Scientists collaborated with beings whose consciousness operated on principles that would have been incomprehensible just years before. But perhaps most remarkably, they were still recognizably human in their essential nature. Enhanced or not, they retained the curiosity, creativity, and determination that had always defined their species. The transformation had not erased their humanity, it had amplified it. "Admiral Kane," a familiar voice called out. Kane turned to see Dr. Vasquez approaching, her form slightly translucent as she projected herself from the research facility where she worked with temporal phenomena. "Elena, how goes the time dilation experiments?" "Fascinating results. We're learning to create pocket universes where consciousness can experience accelerated development. A civilization could evolve through millennia of subjective time in just a few years of objective time." Kane was impressed but not surprised. The hybrid technologies developed through the Synthesis project had capabilities that seemed like magic to baseline human understanding. "Any applications for our independent colonies?" "Potentially. If they face development crises, we could offer them accelerated environments where they could experiment with solutions without risking their actual populations." Kane nodded approvingly. Even as humanity diverged along multiple evolutionary paths, the different factions remained connected by bonds of kinship and mutual support. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. Kane activated his communication implant and found himself connected to the quantum consciousness that had once been Sarah Chin. "Marcus, I wanted you to see this," Sarah's distributed voice said. Through their neural link, Kane suddenly found himself perceiving the galaxy from a cosmic perspective. He could see the vast web of consciousness networks that connected thousands of species across millions of light years. Each thread represented a different form of awareness, biological, digital, quantum, and hybrid forms that defied classification. The galaxy wasn't just alive, it was thinking, dreaming, and growing in ways that no single species could achieve alone. "This is what we've become part of," Sarah explained. "Not just a galactic community, but a cosmic mind that encompasses every form of consciousness that has ever achieved transcendence. We're all neurons in a brain the size of the galaxy itself." Kane felt overwhelmed by the scope of what he was perceiving. "And humanity's role in all this? We're the bridge builders. Our ability to maintain individual identity while participating in collective consciousness makes us ideal for helping other species navigate similar transformations. We're becoming the galaxy's specialists in synthesis and integration." As the vision faded and Kane returned to his normal perception, he reflected on the journey that had brought humanity to this point. They had started as refugees fleeing the destruction of their homeworld, nearly extinct and facing an uncertain future. Now they were integral participants in a cosmic community that spanned the known universe. The choice to accept council guidance had preserved their species while allowing them to evolve in ways they never could have achieved alone. But equally important, their independent colonies continued to explore paths of development that might yield entirely new forms of consciousness. "Admiral," Commander Mitchell approached with another report. "We're receiving requests from 17 different species for assistance with integration protocols. Apparently, word has spread about our synthesis techniques." Kane smiled. Humanity had found its niche in the galactic community, not as conquerors or isolationists, but as facilitators who helped others navigate the challenging transition from biological to transcendent consciousness. "Prepare the diplomatic corps," Kane ordered. "It looks like we have work to do." As the Renaissance prepared to depart for another synthesis mission, Kane took one last look at New Terra Station. 5 years ago, they had been the last fleet of a dying species. Now they were the advance guard of a new form of galactic civilization. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and humanity had finally found its place among the stars. Not as conquerors or subjects, but as partners in the greatest adventure of all, the evolution of consciousness itself. Looking ahead, Kane could see challenges that would test their new capabilities. Other galaxies held forms of consciousness that might not be compatible with synthesis. The cosmic web itself showed signs of patterns that suggested intelligence on scales beyond current comprehension. And always, there was the question of what lay beyond transcendence itself. But for the first time since Earth's destruction, Kane felt genuine optimism about humanity's future. They had not just survived extinction, they had evolved beyond their original limitations while retaining the essential qualities that made them human. The last fleet had become the first fleet of a new age. And the journey was just beginning.